The rain slammed against the window like it was trying to break into our tiny Brooklyn apartment, a relentless drumbeat that matched the pounding in my chest. I was 24, broke, and staring at a rejection email from yet another gallery, the words blurring into a familiar sting. Your work lacks emotional depth. But it wasn't the email that had me unraveling tonight. It was the way Julian looked at me from across the room, his hazel eyes catching the lamplight, like he could see the ache I'd buried so deep I didn't even know it was there. I slumped on the couch, my spine a knot of stress from hauling canvases through the city all day. Julian, my roommate of 6 months, was sprawled on the floor, sketching in his notebook, his broad shoulders relaxed in a way I envied. We'd met through a Craigslist ad. Me, a painter chasing dreams in a city that chewed them up. Him, a freelance graphic designer with a laugh that could disarm anyone. He was black, confident, with a warmth that filled our cramped space. And I was, well, Ethan, a wiry Korean-American kid who overthought everything. We were opposites, yet somehow, we clicked, shared late-night talks, bad takeout, and a playlist that never stopped. But tonight, something felt different, like the air itself was holding its breath. "Ethan, you look like you got hit by a truck," Julian said, closing his sketchbook. His voice was low, teasing, but there was a gentleness there that made my throat tighten. I forced a laugh, rubbing my neck. Just my back. Carrying those canvases up 4 flights of stairs is gonna kill me. He stood, stretching, his t-shirt riding up to reveal a sliver of skin. "Want me to help? I'm basically a professional at this point." He grinned, referencing the time he'd massaged his sister's shoulders after her marathon. I hesitated. The idea of his hands on me, even for something as innocent as a back rub, sent a jolt through my system I couldn't name. "Sure," I said, too quickly, my voice betraying me. I turned away, pulling off my hoodie to hide the flush creeping up my neck. I sat on the edge of the couch, my heart racing as Julian moved behind me. His hands were warm, steady, pressing into my shoulders with a confidence that made me dizzy. Each need unraveled something. My muscles, yes, but also a wall I'd built so carefully I hadn't realized it was there. "Damn, you're tense," he murmured, his breath close to my ear. I shivered, though the room was warm. His fingers worked lower, tracing the curve of my spine, and I felt it. A spark, a pull, something alive and terrifying. I'd spent years dodging feelings like this, telling myself I didn't have time for complications, that I was too focused on my art, my hustle. But Julian's touch was waking something I didn't know was starving, something that had been quiet for so long it felt like betrayal to acknowledge it. I closed my eyes, trying to focus on the rain, the city noise, anything but the heat of his hands. "You don't have to do this," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I want to," he replied, and there was something in his tone, sure, unwavering, that made me turn my head slightly. Our eyes met, and for a moment, the world stopped. His gaze held no judgment, only a quiet question, like he was waiting for me to catch up to something he'd already seen. I didn't know then that this moment would crack my life open, that his touch would reach beyond my skin to a part of me I'd locked away. But as his hands stilled, lingering at the small of my back, I felt the first tremor of a truth I couldn't outrun. The next morning, the apartment felt too small. I avoided Julian's eyes over coffee, my mind replaying the night before like a film I couldn't pause. He acted normal, joking about the burnt toast, but I caught him watching me when he thought I wasn't looking. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister, Hannah, asking if I'd be home for Chuseok. I typed a quick maybe, but the truth was, I hadn't gone back to Seattle in years. Home meant questions about my art, my future, my lack of a girlfriend. Questions I dodged because they led to truths I wasn't ready to face. "Plans for the day?" Julian asked, leaning against the counter, his sketchbook tucked under his arm. "Gallery hunting," I lied. I'd planned to hide in my room and paint, to drown out the confusion swirling in my chest. "You?" "Client meeting, then maybe a drink with some friends. You should come." His smile was easy, but there was an edge to it, like he was testing the waters. I shook my head. Got too much to do. The excuse felt flimsy, but I needed space to untangle whatever this was. Julian nodded, unfazed, but as he left, he brushed past me, his shoulder grazing mine. It was deliberate, I was sure of it, and it left me standing there, heart pounding, wondering what I was so afraid of. That afternoon, I set up my easel, but the canvas stayed blank. My usual abstracts, bold slashes of color, chaotic yet controlled, felt wrong. Instead, I kept seeing Julian's hands, the curve of his jaw, the way his laugh lit up the room. I grabbed a pencil and started sketching, not my usual style, but something raw, unguarded. It was him, his profile, the way he leaned into his work, the quiet strength in his movements. I tore the page out, crumpled it, then smoothed it flat again. What was I doing? By evening, I was a mess. I paced the apartment, the rain still falling outside, mirroring the storm in my head. I'd spent my life building walls, against my parents' expectations, against the world's judgment, against myself. But Julian was slipping through the cracks, and I didn't know how to stop it, or if I wanted to. When he came home, the air shifted again. He was a little buzzed from drinks, his grin looser, his eyes brighter. "Miss me?" he teased, dropping his bag by the door. I rolled my eyes, but my pulse betrayed me. "You wish." He laughed, flopping onto the couch beside me. "What's with you, Ethan? You've been weird all day." I froze. He was close, too close, his knee brushing mine. The truth clawed at my throat, but I swallowed it down. "Just tired," I said, but my voice cracked, and his eyes softened. "Talk to me," he said, quieter now, his hand resting on the couch, inches from mine. And in that moment, I wanted to. God, I wanted to tell him everything. But fear is a powerful thing, and mine had roots deeper than I could reach. The silence stretched between us, heavy with things unsaid. Julian's hand stayed close to mine, his fingers tapping lightly on the couch, like he was giving me an out but hoping I wouldn't take it. I stared at the floor, tracing the scuff marks on the hardwood, my mind a tangle of fear and longing. "I'm fine," I said finally, the words tasting like a lie. I stood, needing distance, and grabbed my sketchbook from the coffee table. "Just need to work." Julian's eyes followed me, sharp and searching. "You sure? 'Cause you don't look fine." His voice was gentle, but it carried a weight that made my chest ache. He wasn't pushing, not exactly, but he wasn't letting me off the hook either. I nodded, retreating to my room, the sketchbook clutched like a shield. Inside, I sank onto my bed, the crumpled drawing of Julian staring up at me from the floor where I'd tossed it. I couldn't stop seeing his face, the way his lips curved when he smiled, the way his eyes seemed to see through me. I'd spent years convincing myself I didn't need anyone, that my art was enough. But now, every stroke of my pencil felt like a confession I wasn't ready to make. The next few days were a blur of avoidance. I left early, stayed out late, haunting coffee shops and galleries, pretending I was chasing opportunities when really, I was running from him. Julian didn't call me out on it, but I felt his gaze every time we crossed paths, over breakfast, in the hallway, when he'd catch me staring at my blank canvas. He was patient, too patient, and it only made me feel worse. On Friday, I came home to find him cooking, the smell of garlic and herbs filling the apartment. He was humming, his movements easy as he stirred something on the stove. "Made too much pasta," he said without turning. "You in?" I hesitated, my stomach growling. "Yeah, sure." I dropped my bag and slid onto a stool at the counter, watching him work. His hands, those same hands that had unraveled me days ago, moved with precision, chopping basil, tossing it into the sauce. I wondered what it would be like to feel them again, not just on my back, but everywhere, pulling me closer. "Earth to Ethan," he said, snapping me out of my thoughts. He was holding out a plate, his grin teasing. "You gonna eat or just stare?" I took the plate, my face burning. "Thanks," I mumbled, focusing on the food to avoid his eyes. We ate in silence at first, the clink of forks loud in the small space. Then he started talking, about a client who'd loved his latest design, about a jazz bar he wanted to check out. His voice was a lifeline, pulling me out of my head. "You should come with me tomorrow," he said, leaning back in his chair. "To the bar. Live music, good drinks." It'll be fun. I wanted to say yes, to let myself fall into the ease of his world, but the fear was still there, a shadow I couldn't shake. Maybe, I said, hating how noncommittal it sounded. Julian raised an eyebrow but didn't push. Instead, he stood, clearing the plates. As he passed me, his hand brushed my shoulder, a fleeting touch that sent my heart racing. "Whenever you're ready, man," he said softly, and I knew he wasn't just talking about the bar. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the city's hum filtering through the walls. I thought about my life before Julian. Safe, predictable, lonely. I'd grown up in a house where feelings were rarely discussed, where my parents' expectations loomed large. Good grades, stable job, a nice girl to settle down with. I'd rebelled by choosing art, moving to New York, but I'd never dared to question the deeper parts of myself. Not until now. The next morning, I found a note on the counter, "Jazz bar, 8 p.m. I'll save you a seat." My resolve wavered. I spent the day painting, trying to pour my confusion onto the canvas, but every stroke felt like Julian. Bold, vibrant, undeniable. By evening, I was a wreck, pacing the apartment, debating whether to go. I went. The bar was a hole in the wall in the East Village, packed with people and pulsing with music. Julian was at a table near the stage, his smile lighting up when he saw me. "You made it," he said, handing me a beer. His knee bumped mine under the table, and I didn't pull away. The music was electric, a saxophone weaving stories of heartache and hope. I watched Julian, the way he leaned into the rhythm, his eyes half closed, lost in the sound. I wanted to be that free, that unafraid. When the set ended, he turned to me, his face close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in his eyes. "You okay?" he asked, his voice cutting through the noise. I nodded, but my throat was tight. Just a lot on my mind. He leaned closer, his hand resting on my arm. "Want to talk about it?" I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But the words wouldn't come, not here, not yet. Instead, I shook my head, offering a small smile. Maybe later. He didn't push, just squeezed my arm gently before letting go. But as we walked home through the rain-slicked streets, our shoulders brushing, I felt the weight of that later pressing down on me, a promise I wasn't sure I could keep. Back in the apartment, the air was thick with the scent of rain and the weight of unspoken words. Julian kicked off his shoes, his movements loose from the beers and the music, while I stood by the door, my jacket dripping onto the floor. I couldn't shake the feeling that tonight was a turning point, that if I didn't say something soon, I'd lose my nerve forever. "You were quiet at the bar," Julian said, glancing over his shoulder as he grabbed a glass of water. "Everything good?" I nodded, but my hands were shaking as I hung up my jacket. "Just tired." I lied again, hating how easily the excuse came. He didn't buy it. I could tell by the way his eyes lingered, searching for the truth I was too scared to give. "Ethan," he said, setting the glass down and stepping closer. "You don't have to keep running from whatever's eating you. I'm right here." His words hit like a punch, soft but precise. I opened my mouth to deflect, to say something sarcastic, but nothing came out. Instead, I felt a crack in the wall I'd built, a fissure letting in light I wasn't ready for. I turned away, grabbing my sketchbook from the couch, needing something to anchor me. "I'm fine," I said, my voice barely audible. "Just need to draw." Julian watched me for a moment, then nodded, his expression unreadable. "All right, but I'm not going anywhere." He headed to his room, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the blank page in front of me. I drew for hours, my pencil moving in fits and starts, sketching fragments of him, his hands, his eyes, the curve of his neck. Each line felt like a step closer to something I couldn't name, something that terrified and thrilled me in equal measure. By the time I stopped, the apartment was quiet, the city asleep outside. I stared at the sketches, my chest tight with a truth I couldn't ignore anymore. The next day, I woke to find Julian gone, a note on the fridge, client meeting, back by noon. I used the time to paint, pouring everything into the canvas. Fear, longing, hope. The colors were bolder than my usual work, the lines less controlled, but it felt honest in a way I hadn't been in years. When Julian came home, he stopped short, staring at the canvas. "Damn, Ethan," he said, his voice low. "This is intense." I shrugged, my face hot. "Just trying something new." He stepped closer, studying the painting. A swirl of blues and reds, abstract yet alive, like a heart laid bare. "It's you," he said quietly. "All of you." I froze, my pulse racing. He wasn't just talking about the painting, and we both knew it. I wanted to run, to hide, but his gaze held me in place, steady and sure. "Julian, I started, but the words caught in my throat. He waited, patient as always, his hands in his pockets like he was giving me all the space in the world. But I didn't want space anymore. I wanted him, his warmth, his laugh, his everything. The realization hit like a tidal wave, and for the first time, I didn't fight it. "I don't know how to do this," I said finally, my voice shaking. I've never let myself." He stepped closer, his eyes soft but intense. "Let yourself what, Ethan?" I swallowed hard, the truth clawing its way out. "Feel this. Want you." The words hung between us, raw and heavy. For a moment, I thought I'd ruined everything, that he'd laugh or back away. But then he smiled, slow and real, and my world tilted. "About time you caught up," he said, his voice warm with relief. He reached out, his hand brushing my cheek, and I leaned into it, my fear melting under his touch. It wasn't just my back he was reaching this time. It was all of me, the parts I'd hidden even from myself. We didn't kiss, not yet. But we stood there, inches apart, the air electric with possibility. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, and for once, I wasn't afraid to jump. The days that followed were a blur of newness. Julian and I didn't talk about it, not directly, but everything had changed. We'd sit closer on the couch, our hands brushing as we passed the coffee pot, our eyes meeting and holding longer than before. I started painting again, really painting, each canvas a step toward understanding myself. Julian was there through it all, his presence steady, his laughter a reminder that I didn't have to do this alone. But fear doesn't vanish overnight. I still woke up some mornings, my chest tight with doubt, wondering if I was ready for this, for him, for us, for the world that would judge us. I thought about my family, about the expectations I'd dodged for years. I thought about the city, vibrant but cruel, and how it would see us. And yet, every time I looked at Julian, those fears felt smaller, less powerful than the pull between us. One night, as we sat on the fire escape, the city sprawling below us, he took my hand, his fingers warm and sure. "You don't have to have it all figured out," he said. "Just be here, with me." And for the first time, I thought maybe I could. The fire escape became our sanctuary, a rickety metal platform where the city's chaos felt distant. Julian's hand in mine was an anchor, his thumb tracing slow circles on my skin as we watched the lights flicker below. I wanted to freeze that moment, to hold on to the warmth of his touch and the quiet certainty in his eyes. But life doesn't pause, and neither did the doubts creeping back in. The next morning, I got a call from Hannah. Her voice was bright, oblivious to the storm in my head. "Ethan, you have to come home for Chuseok. Mom's making japchae, and Dad's been asking about you." Her words were warm, but they carried a weight I couldn't ignore. Home meant facing questions I'd avoided for years, questions I wasn't sure I could answer now that Julian had cracked me open. "I'll think about it," I said, my voice tight. Julian was at the counter, sketching, but I felt his eyes on me as I hung up. I didn't meet his gaze, afraid he'd see the panic I was trying to hide. "You okay?" he asked, setting his pencil down. "Yeah," I lied, busying myself with cleaning paintbrushes that didn't need cleaning. "Just family stuff." He didn't push, but his silence was loud, a reminder that he saw through me. I wanted to tell him about my parents, about the expectations that felt like a noose, about the fear of what it would mean to bring him into that world. But the words stayed locked inside, too heavy to lift. That week, I threw myself into my art, painting with a ferocity I hadn't felt in years. Each canvas was a battle, a way to wrestle with the questions I couldn't voice. Julian gave me space, but he was always there, cooking dinner, playing music, leaving notes on the fridge that made my heart ache with their simplicity. Don't work too hard. Saved you some leftovers. You got this. One evening, he dragged me to an art show in Williamsburg, a pop-up gallery packed with hipsters and critics. My latest piece, a chaotic blend of blues and golds, inspired by that night on the fire escape, was on display, thanks to a friend who'd pulled strings. I stood in the corner, nursing a beer, watching strangers dissect my work. Their words floated over, raw, vulnerable, alive, and for once, I didn't feel like an imposter. Julian found me, his grin wide. They love it, Ethan. You hear that? They're eating it up. I shrugged, but my chest swelled. It's just one piece. It's you, he said, echoing his words from before. He stepped closer, his shoulder brushing mine, and I felt that spark again, the one that made the world feel possible. You're finally letting it out. I looked at him, his face lit by the gallery's soft lights, and I wanted to kiss him right there, in front of everyone. But the fear was still there, a whisper telling me I wasn't ready, that this, us, was too fragile to survive the world's gaze. So I smiled instead, nudging him back. Thanks for making me come. Anytime, he said, his eyes holding mine a moment too long. When we got home, the apartment felt different, like it was holding its breath again. Julian flopped onto the couch, pulling me down beside him. So what's next? He asked, his tone light, but his eyes serious. Another painting? Or something else? I knew what he meant. He was asking about us, about what came after the fire escape, after the gallery. My throat tightened, and I looked away, focusing on the rain-streaked window. I don't know, I admitted. I want this. But I'm scared, Julian. He shifted, his hand finding mine. Of what? Everything, I said, my voice breaking. My family, this city, myself. I've spent so long hiding who I am. I don't know how to stop. He was quiet for a moment, his thumb brushing over my knuckles. You don't have to do it alone, he said finally. I'm here, Ethan. For all of it. His words were a lifeline, but they also terrified me. Because letting him in meant letting go of the walls I'd built, the ones that had kept me safe, but also kept me alone. I squeezed his hand, my heart pounding, and for the first time, I let myself believe that maybe I could do this. The next day, I booked a ticket to Seattle. I didn't tell Julian, not because I didn't trust him, but because I needed to face this on my own first. I needed to see if I could stand in my truth without crumbling. As I packed, my sketchbook fell open to that first drawing of him, the one I'd crumpled and saved. I traced the lines, my fingers trembling, and I knew I was carrying him with me, even if he wasn't there. The flight was a blur of nerves and second-guessing. When I landed, Hannah picked me up, her hug tight and familiar. You look different, she said, studying me. Good different. I forced a smile, my stomach churning. Just New York, I guess. But it wasn't New York. It was Julian, and the part of me he'd touched, the part that was finally waking up. Seattle smelled like pine and rain, a sharp contrast to Brooklyn's grit. My parents' house was the same as always, tidy, warm, filled with the scent of my mom's cooking. But I felt like a stranger, my skin too tight for the boy who'd grown up here. Dinner was a flurry of questions. How's New York? Any galleries picking up your work? No girlfriend yet? I dodged them with practiced ease, but each one felt like a needle, pricking at the truth I was hiding. Hannah watched me across the table, her eyes sharp. She'd always been the one to call me out, even when we were kids. After dinner, as we washed dishes, she bumped my shoulder. What's going on with you, Ethan? You're all twitchy. I focused on scrubbing a plate, my heart racing. Just stressed. Art stuff. She snorted. Liar. It's not just art. You've got that look, like you're carrying a secret. I froze, the dish slipping from my hands into the sink. She was right, of course. Hannah always was. But saying it out loud, to her, to my family, felt like stepping off a ledge with no idea what was below. I'll tell you later, I said, my voice barely audible. She didn't push, but her silence was heavy, expectant. That night, I lay in my childhood bed, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars still stuck to the ceiling. I thought about Julian, his laugh, his hands, the way he made me feel seen. I pulled out my phone and texted him. In Seattle. Miss you. I hit send before I could overthink it. my heart pounding as I waited for a reply. His response came minutes later. Miss you too. You okay? Simple words, but they hit like a wave, washing away some of the fear. I typed back, trying to be, and for the first time, I meant it. The next day was Chuseok, a blur of food and family. I helped my mom set out offerings for our ancestors, the ritual grounding me even as my mind raced. My dad clapped me on the shoulder, his pride quiet but real. You're doing good, Ethan. Keep at it. His words, meant to encourage, only deepened my guilt. How could I tell him that the life he imagined for me wasn't the one I wanted? After the ceremony, Hannah dragged me to the backyard, the air cool and crisp. Spill it, she said, crossing her arms. What's got you so messed up? I took a deep breath, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. There's someone. In New York. His name's Julian. Her eyes widened, but she didn't flinch. Okay. And I think I'm in love with him. The words felt foreign, huge, but saying them lifted a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying. But I'm scared, Hannah, of what it means, of what Mom and Dad will think, of everything. She was quiet for a moment, then hugged me, fierce and tight. Ethan, you idiot. You don't have to do this alone. I'm here. We'll figure it out. Her words broke something in me, a dam I'd held up for years. I cried, right there in the backyard, and she didn't let go. For the first time, I felt like I could breathe, like I wasn't carrying this alone. When I got back to New York, Julian was waiting at the airport. He didn't say anything, just pulled me into a hug that said everything. I clung to him, my face buried in his shoulder, the world falling away. I told my sister, I whispered, about us. He pulled back, his eyes searching mine. And she's got my back. I smiled, shaky but real. I'm still scared, but I want this. I want you. His grin was blinding, and before I could say anything else, he kissed me. It was soft at first, tentative, then deeper, like he was pouring all of himself into it. I kissed him back, my hands fisting in his shirt, and for the first time, I wasn't running. We went home, the apartment feeling like ours in a way it hadn't before. That night, we talked, really talked, about our fears, our dreams, the lives we wanted to build. I told him about Seattle, about Hannah, about the weight of my parents' expectations. He told me about his own family, about coming out to his mom at 17, about the fights and the healing that followed. His hand stayed in mine, steady and warm, and I knew I was falling, hard and fast, into something I couldn't walk away from. But the world doesn't stop for love, and New York is a city that demands you keep up. The next week, I got a call from the gallery in Williamsburg. They wanted another piece, maybe a whole show. It was the break I'd been chasing, but it came with a catch. They wanted something personal, something that dug deeper than my usual work. I knew what that meant. It meant painting Julian, painting us, painting the truth I was only just starting to embrace. I looked at him, sprawled on the couch with his sketchbook, and I knew I had to try. Not just for the gallery, but for me, for us. The gallery's offer hung over me like a storm cloud, equal parts thrilling and terrifying. They wanted raw, unfiltered truth, and I knew that meant painting Julian. Not just his face or his hands, but the way he made me feel, the way he'd cracked open my world. I spent days sketching, each line a step closer to something I couldn't take back. Julian watched me work, his presence steady but quiet, like he knew I was wrestling with more than just paint. One night, I showed him the sketches. They were rough, unguarded, his profile against the fire escape, his hands mid-gesture, his eyes catching the light. He studied them, his expression unreadable, then looked at me. "This is how you see me?" he asked, his voice soft. I nodded, my throat tight. It's how you make me feel." He reached for my hand, pulling me close. "Then paint it, Ethan. All of it. Don't hold back." His words lit a fire in me. I painted for days, barely sleeping, the canvas becoming a mirror of everything I'd kept hidden. Fear, love, vulnerability. The piece was huge, a riot of color and emotion, Julian's form at its heart. When I finished, I stepped back, my hands shaking. It was the most honest thing I'd ever made. The gallery loved it. They scheduled a solo show for next month, my name in lights for the first time. But as the date approached, so did my fear. This wasn't just art. It was me, laid bare for the world to see. I thought about my parents, about what they'd say if they saw it. I hadn't told them about Julian, not yet. Hannah knew, but she was one thing. My parents were another. Julian sensed my panic. One evening, as we sat on the couch, he pulled me against him, his arms warm and solid. "You don't have to do this alone," he said, echoing his words from before. "I'll be there at the show, every step." I leaned into him, my heart racing. What if it's too much? What if they hate it? What if they hate me? He tilted my chin up, his eyes fierce. "They won't. And if they do, screw 'em. You're enough, Ethan. More than enough." His words carried me through the next weeks, through the sleepless nights and the endless preparations. The show was in a converted warehouse, the space buzzing with critics, artists, and strangers. My painting, starving, hung at the center, Julian's form glowing under the lights. I stood beside it, my stomach in knots, as people whispered and pointed. Julian was there, as promised, his hand brushing mine as we moved through the crowd. His presence was a lifeline, grounding me as the reviews rolled in, bold, vulnerable, a revelation. I overheard someone call it a love letter, and my face burned. They weren't wrong. Halfway through the night, my phone buzzed. It was Hannah, calling from Seattle. "Ethan, I saw the photos online. That painting, it's incredible. Is that Julian?" I stepped outside, the city's hum of familiar comfort. "Yeah," I said, my voice shaky. "It's him." She was quiet for a moment, then, "I'm proud of you. And I'm coming to New York next month. I want to meet him." I smiled, relief flooding me. "You'll love him." When I went back inside, Julian was waiting, his grin wide. "You okay?" I nodded, taking his hand. Better than okay. The show was a success, but it wasn't the reviews or the sales that mattered. It was Julian, standing beside me, his hand in mine. It was Hannah's voice, her support crossing miles. It was the truth I'd painted, the truth I was finally living. But life isn't a gallery opening, and the real world was waiting. A week later, I got an email from my mom, asking me to call. My heart sank. I knew what was coming. The questions, the expectations, the moment I'd been dreading. I showed Julian the email, my hands trembling. "You want me to be there when you call?" he asked, his voice steady. I nodded, grateful beyond words. We sat on the couch, my phone between us, and I dialed. My mom's voice was warm, familiar, but there was an edge to it. "Ethan, we saw the article about your show. It's different. Who's the man in the painting?" I took a deep breath, Julian's hand squeezing mine. "His name's Julian," I said. He's my boyfriend." The silence on the other end was deafening, but Julian's touch kept me grounded. When my mom finally spoke, her voice was quiet. "We need to talk about this. Come home soon, okay?" I hung up, my chest tight, but lighter than I'd expected. Julian pulled me close, his lips brushing my forehead. "You did it," he whispered. And I had. It wasn't over. There were still conversations, maybe fights, ahead. But for the first time, I wasn't running. I was standing, with Julian beside me, and that was enough. The weeks after the call were a tightrope walk. My mom's words echoed in my head. "We need to talk about this," and I braced for the worst. Julian was my rock, his presence a constant reminder that I wasn't alone. We fell into a rhythm, our days filled with small, perfect moments. Cooking together, sketching side by side, stealing kisses on the fire escape. But the looming trip to Seattle hung over me, a shadow I couldn't shake. I painted more, each canvas a step toward owning my truth. Julian watched, his pride quiet but fierce. "You're unstoppable," he'd say, and I started to believe him. My art was changing, growing, just like me. The gallery called again, offering a bigger show next year, and for the first time, I felt like I belonged in this world. Hannah arrived in New York a month later, her energy a burst of light in our tiny apartment. She hugged Julian the moment she met him, her grin wide. "You're good for him," she whispered to me later, and I felt a weight lift. We spent the weekend showing her the city, art galleries, jazz bars, the fire escape at dusk. She fit into our world like she'd always been there, and for the first time, I saw a future where my family and my truth could coexist. But Seattle was still waiting. I booked the tickets, Julian insisting on coming with me. "We're in this together," he said, and I didn't argue. The flight was quiet, his hand in mine the whole way. When we landed, my parents were at the airport, their faces a mix of warmth and uncertainty. My mom hugged me, her grip tight, but her eyes flickered to Julian, assessing. Dinner that night was tense. My dad asked about my art, my mom about New York, but the real question hung unspoken. Finally, over dessert, my mom set down her fork. "Ethan, tell us about Julian." I took a deep breath, my hand finding his under the table. "He's my boyfriend," I said, the words steadier this time. He's everything." My parents exchanged a look, the kind that carried years of unspoken history. My dad cleared his throat. "This is new for us," he said. "But you're our son. We want you to be happy." It wasn't perfect. There were questions, awkward silences, moments where I saw the struggle in their eyes. But there was also love, buried under the discomfort, and that was enough to start. Julian was charming, his warmth easing the tension, and by the end of the night, my mom was laughing at his stories, my dad asking about his designs. Back in New York, the apartment felt like home in a way it never had. I painted, Julian sketched, and we built a life together. One canvas, one moment, one truth at a time. The fear was still there, a quiet hum, but it no longer ruled me. I'd spent so long starving for something I couldn't name, but Julian had touched that part of me, brought it to life. And now, with his hand in mine, I was learning to feed it. The gallery show came and went, a blur of lights and praise. My parents didn't come, but they sent a card, their handwriting shaky but sincere. Hannah was there, cheering loudest, her pride a mirror of Julian's. As I stood in front of my newest painting, a vibrant, fearless declaration of us, I realized something. I wasn't just an artist, or a son, or a lover. I was Ethan, whole and enough, and I was finally free. Years later, I'd look back on that rainy night when Julian's hands first touched my back, when he reached a part of me I didn't know was starving. It wasn't just a moment, it was the start of everything. A life where I didn't have to hide, where love wasn't a secret but a truth I could paint, could live, could share. And every time I looked at Julian, his smile as bright as that first night, I knew I'd found something worth fighting for.